The clock on the construction site read 7:30 p.m. when Jake finally set down his hammer. His back ached from 12 hours of lifting, hammering, and hauling materials up 3 flights of stairs. The building they were working on was supposed to be finished 2 weeks ago, but delays kept pushing everything back. And with delays came smaller paychecks. Jake wiped the sweat from his forehead with a dirty sleeve and looked around at the mess of concrete dust and scattered tools. The other workers had already left an hour ago, but he stayed behind to finish installing the bathroom fixtures. Every extra hour meant a few more dollars, and right now every dollar counted. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another text message. He didn't need to look to know what it was about. The landlord had been sending the same message for 3 days straight. Rent is 5 days late. Pay by Friday or start packing. Jake pulled out his phone anyway. Sure enough, there it was. The same threatening message, but this time with an added line. This is your final warning. He shoved the phone back into his pocket and grabbed his lunchbox. The thermos inside still had some cold coffee from this morning. He drank it down in one gulp, trying to push away the worry that had been eating at him all week. The walk to the subway station took 15 minutes. Jake's work boots made a steady rhythm against the pavement as he passed the fancy shops and restaurants he could never afford. Through the windows, he could see people in clean clothes eating meals that probably cost more than he made in a day. But he wasn't bitter about it. He'd learned a long time ago that being angry about other people's good fortune wouldn't change his own situation. He had work to do, bills to pay, and a daughter to take care of. That's what mattered. The subway station was busier than usual for a Thursday evening. Commuters in business suits rushed past him, talking loudly on their phones about meetings and deals. Jake found a spot near the wall and pulled out his worn leather wallet. Inside were 3 $20 bills, a 10, and some loose change. $68.37. That was it. That was everything he had until next Friday's paycheck, assuming the project didn't get delayed again. He did the math in his head for the 100th time today. $40 for groceries, $20 for gas to get to work. That left $8.37. Not enough for the school supplies his daughter needed for her science project. Definitely not enough for the $200 the landlord wanted by tomorrow. Jake leaned against the cold tile wall and closed his eyes for a moment. When did everything become so hard? 2 years ago, when his wife was still alive, they were doing okay. Not great, but okay. They had a small apartment, a car that ran most of the time, and enough money for the occasional pizza night. Then the medical bills started coming. Insurance covered some of it, but not nearly enough. The treatments, the medications, the specialists, it all added up faster than he could keep track of. Even after she passed away, the bills kept coming like cruel reminders of everything they'd lost. He opened his eyes and watched the crowd of people rushing past. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going and how they were going to get there. He envied that certainty. A train arrived with a loud screech of brakes and half the crowd disappeared into the subway cars. The platform became quieter, and that's when Jake noticed her. She was sitting alone on one of the metal benches about 20 feet away. At first glance, she looked like she belonged with the business crowd. Her coat was the kind you'd see in expensive store windows, and her shoes were definitely not from the discount rack. But something was wrong with the picture. Her coat was torn at the shoulder, and there was a small stain on the front that looked like coffee or maybe blood. Her usually perfect hair was messy, and her expensive purse was open beside her with its contents scattered across the bench. But what really caught his attention was the fact that she was crying. Not the quiet, dignified crying you might see in movies. This was real crying, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and desperate. Her shoulders shook with each sob, and she kept wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to pull herself together. Jake looked around to see if anyone else had noticed. A few people glanced in her direction, but they all kept walking. In a city of 8 million people, everyone had learned to mind their own business. He should mind his own business too. He had enough problems without getting involved in someone else's, but something about the woman's distress reminded him of how he felt during those long nights at the hospital, sitting in uncomfortable chairs and watching the life drain out of the person he loved most. Before he could talk himself out of it, Jake found himself walking toward the bench. "Excuse me," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you okay?" The woman looked up at him with red, puffy eyes. She was probably in her 40s, with the kind of confidence that usually comes from success and money. But right now, she just looked lost and scared. "I'm sorry," she said, trying to compose herself. "I don't mean to be a bother. I'll be fine." "You don't look fine," Jake said, sitting down on the far end of the bench to give her space. "Did something happen?" The woman hesitated for a moment, then the words came pouring out. She'd been walking back to her car after a business dinner when 3 men surrounded her. They took her wallet, her phone, even pulled the watch off her wrist. When she tried to resist, one of them pushed her down, tearing her coat and scraping her hands on the concrete. "The worst part is," she continued, "I don't even remember how to get home without my phone. I know it sounds stupid, but I always just follow the GPS. And I don't have any cash for a taxi or the subway." Jake listened without interrupting. He'd heard similar stories before. The city could be dangerous, especially at night. But there was something different about this woman's situation. She seemed genuinely shocked that something like this could happen to her, as if she'd been living in a bubble that had suddenly burst. "What's your name?" Jake asked. "Linda," she replied. "And thank you for stopping." Most people are afraid," Jake finished. "Can't blame them, really. World's a scary place." Linda nodded and tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I suppose I should start walking. Maybe I'll recognize something eventually." "Where do you need to go?" "The Upper East Side, near Central Park." Jake knew the area. It was expensive. The kind of place where doormen wore uniforms and apartments cost more per month than he made in a year. It was also at least an hour away by subway, maybe 2 if she got lost. He looked at Linda's torn coat and scraped hands, then back at his wallet. $68.37. Everything he had in the world. But looking at this woman, scared, hurt, and completely out of her element, Jake knew what he had to do. Sometimes doing the right thing wasn't about what you could afford. Sometimes it was about what kind of person you chose to be when nobody was watching. He pulled out the $10 bill and held it toward Linda. "Take this," he said. "It'll get you home." Linda stared at the $10 bill in Jake's outstretched hand like it was something foreign. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She looked from the money to Jake's face, then back to the money again. "I can't take this," she finally whispered. "You don't even know me." Jake kept his hand steady, the bill fluttering slightly in the breeze from a passing train. "Doesn't matter. You need help, and I can help. That's all there is to it." "But—" Linda's voice trailed off as she really looked at Jake for the first time. His work clothes were stained with paint and concrete dust. His boots were so worn that the leather had cracked near the toes. The jacket he wore had seen better days, probably better years. Everything about him said he was a man who worked hard for every dollar he earned. "You need this more than I do," she said, pushing his hand away gently. Jake let out a small laugh that didn't sound happy. "Lady, I've been broke before, and I'll probably be broke again. But you're sitting here hurt and scared with no way to get home. That's a different kind of problem." A group of teenagers walked past, laughing loudly about something on one of their phones. Their designer sneakers probably cost more than Jake made in a week, but they didn't even glance at the woman crying on the bench. To them, she was invisible. "I don't understand," Linda said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this? You don't owe me anything." Jake thought about the question for a moment. It was the same thing his buddy Tom had asked him last month, when Jake lent him $50 for his kid's medicine, even though Jake's own refrigerator was nearly empty. "Why do you always do this to yourself?" Tom had said. "Why do you keep giving away money you don't have?" "My wife used to say something," Jake said, settling back on the bench. "She'd say that kindness isn't about what you have left over after you take care of yourself. It's about what you're willing to share even when you don't have enough." Linda's eyes filled with fresh tears. But these seemed different from the scared, frustrated tears she'd been crying before. "She sounds like a wise woman," Linda said softly. "She was," Jake replied. "Cancer took her 2 years ago, but I still hear her voice sometimes. She always saw the good in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves." The platform was getting more crowded again as another train approached. Office workers checked their phones and shifted their bags, preparing for the evening commute home to families and dinner in warm houses. "Look," Jake said, standing up and pulling Linda gently to her feet. "Let me walk you to the ticket counter. $10 will get you a Metro card and enough rides to get home safely." Linda hesitated for another moment, then nodded. They walked together through the crowd, Jake's heavy work boots clicking against the tile floor while Linda's heels made a softer tapping sound. At the ticket counter, Jake flagged down the transit worker behind the glass. "She needs a Metro card with $10 on it," Jake said, sliding the bill through the slot. The transit worker, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, looked between Jake and Linda. He'd probably seen this scene before, someone helping a stranger in need. In a city where people usually walked past each other without making eye contact, small acts of kindness stood out. "You want the paper ride or unlimited?" the worker asked. "Paper ride is fine," Linda said quietly. "Thank you." The machine hummed and clicked, and a few seconds later the worker slid a yellow Metro card through the slot. "There you go. That'll get you home safe." Linda took the card with trembling hands. She turned to face Jake, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Around them, the subway station continued its evening rush. People hurrying home, announcements echoing over the loudspeaker, the distant rumble of trains moving through tunnels. "I don't know how to thank you," Linda said finally. "You don't need to thank me," Jake replied. "Just get home safe. And maybe," he paused, looking a little embarrassed, "maybe someday if you see someone else who needs help, you'll remember this moment." Linda nodded, unable to speak. She wanted to tell him about her company, about the foundation she'd been planning, about how she could easily repay him 1,000 times over. But something stopped her. This moment felt too pure, too honest to complicate with explanations about money and business and the complicated world she usually lived in. Instead, she did something that surprised both of them. She reached out and hugged him. It was a quick, awkward hug, the kind between strangers who suddenly found themselves connected by an unexpected moment of human decency. Jake smelled like sawdust and honest work, while Linda's expensive perfume was almost covered by the scent of fear and exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered into his shoulder. "You have no idea what this means to me." When they separated, Jake smiled, the first real smile Linda had seen from him. It transformed his face, making him look younger and less tired. "Everyone deserves to get home safely," he said simply. Jake started to walk away, but Linda called after him. "Wait, I don't even know your name," he turned back. Jake Wilson. I'm Linda Chen," she said. "And I promise I'll never forget this." Jake nodded and disappeared into the crowd heading toward the downtown trains. Linda watched him go until his faded jacket was lost among all the other people rushing through their evening routines. She looked down at the Metro card in her hands. Such a small thing, a piece of yellow plastic worth $10. But right now it felt like the most valuable thing she'd ever owned. The train to the Upper East Side arrived with a whoosh of air and the screech of brakes. Linda got on and found a seat near the window. As the train pulled away from the station, she pressed her face to the glass, hoping to catch one more glimpse of Jake. But he was already gone. During the long ride home, Linda thought about the last time a stranger had helped her without wanting anything in return. She couldn't remember one. In her world of business meetings and networking events, every kindness came with an agenda. Every favor had a price, but Jake had asked for nothing. He hadn't even waited around to be thanked properly. He'd simply seen someone in need and acted, despite clearly having very little to spare. Linda pulled out her phone. No, wait. Her phone was gone, taken by the robbers along with everything else. She felt naked without it, disconnected from the digital world that usually consumed every moment of her day. Maybe that was a good thing. Maybe she needed to sit with this experience, to really feel it without immediately turning it into a social media post or a business lesson. She thought about Jake's wife. The woman who had taught him that kindness wasn't about what you had left over. Linda wondered what kind of person could inspire such generosity, even after she was gone. As the train carried her home to her penthouse apartment and her comfortable life, Linda made a silent promise. She would find Jake Wilson again, and when she did, she would make sure that his kindness was rewarded in ways he couldn't even imagine. The $10 Metro card was just the beginning. Jake's apartment building didn't have a doorman or fancy lights in the hallway. The paint was peeling near the stairs and the elevator had been broken for 3 months. But it was home, and right now that's all that mattered. He climbed to the 3rd floor, his work boots heavy on each step. The hallway smelled like Mrs. Rodriguez's cooking from apartment 3B, something with beans and spices that always made his stomach growl. He could hear a television playing too loudly from 3C and a baby crying from somewhere down the hall. Jake stopped at apartment 3A and fumbled with his keys. Before he could get the door open, Mrs. Rodriguez poked her head out from across the hall. "Jake, you're later than usual tonight," she said in her thick accent. She was 72 years old and had been watching his daughter after school for the past 2 years. He couldn't afford proper daycare, and Mrs. Rodriguez refused to take more than $20 a week for helping out. "Sorry." Mrs. R had to finish up some work at the site. "How was she today?" "Good as always. Finished her homework, ate the sandwich you left, and helped me fold laundry. That girl of yours is special, Jake, real special." Jake smiled for the second time that day. "Thanks for watching her. I don't know what we'd do without you." "Nonsense. She's like my own granddaughter. Now go on. She's been waiting for you." Jake opened his apartment door and was immediately hit by the warmth and comfort of home. It wasn't much. A small living room that doubled as a dining room, a tiny kitchen, and one bedroom that he'd given to his daughter while he slept on the couch. But it was clean and filled with love. "Daddy," a voice called from the kitchen table. His daughter Lily looked up from her homework with a smile that could light up the whole building. She was 8 years old, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn streak. Her school backpack was open beside her and papers were spread across the table. "Hey, kiddo, what are you working on?" "Science project about the solar system. I have to build a model of Jupiter and write a report about it." She held up a piece of paper covered in her careful handwriting. "Did you know Jupiter has 79 moons?" Jake sat down beside her and looked at her work. Her handwriting was neat, much neater than his had ever been. She was smart, smarter than anyone in his family had ever been. Sometimes he worried that she was too smart for the opportunities he could give her. "That's amazing, sweetheart. What do you need for the model?" Lily's face fell slightly. "The teacher gave us a list. Styrofoam balls, paint, wire. It's all at the craft store. But it's okay if we can't get everything. I can just draw a picture instead." Jake's heart sank. He knew exactly how much those supplies would cost. At least $15, maybe $20. Money he didn't have, especially after giving his last 10 to Linda at the subway station. But looking at his daughter's face, seeing how hard she was trying not to be disappointed, Jake made a decision. He'd figure something out. He always did. "We'll get what you need," he said. "Maybe not tomorrow, but we'll figure it out." Lily's smile returned, brighter than before. "Thanks, Daddy. I knew you'd find a way." While Lily finished her homework, Jake made dinner. Spaghetti with tomato sauce from a jar, not fancy, but filling. They ate together at the small table, talking about her day at school and his day at work. He didn't mention the eviction notice or the dwindling money in his wallet. Those were adult problems, and Lily deserved to be a kid for as long as possible. After dinner, they watched TV together on the old couch. Lily curled up beside him, her head on his shoulder, while some sitcom played on their ancient television. These were the moments that made everything else worth it. The long days, the worry about money, the constant stress of trying to keep their small family afloat. "Daddy," Lily said softly during a commercial break. "Yeah, sweetheart." "Do you miss Mommy?" The question hit him like a punch to the chest. They didn't talk about her mother very often. It was still too painful even after 2 years. "Every day," Jake said honestly. "But you know what? I see her in you all the time. In your smile and how smart you are and how kind you are to everyone you meet. I wish she could help with my science project. She was good at that stuff." "She was," Jake agreed. "But she also taught you to be curious and ask questions. That's the most important part of any science project." Lily seemed satisfied with that answer. She settled back against his shoulder, and within minutes she was asleep. Jake carried her to the bedroom and tucked her into bed, then returned to the living room to face the pile of bills on the kitchen table. The eviction notice was right on top. Bold red letters demanding payment by tomorrow afternoon. Below that were the electric bill, the phone bill, and a stack of medical bills from his wife's treatment that seemed to multiply every month. Jake ran his hands through his hair and tried to think. He could call his boss and ask for an advance on next week's pay, but he'd already done that twice this month. He could try to borrow money from Tom, but Tom was struggling just as much as he was. Meanwhile, across the city, Linda Chen stood in her penthouse apartment, looking out at the glittering lights of Manhattan. The apartment was beautiful, floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive furniture, a kitchen that looked like something from a magazine. But tonight it felt cold and empty. She'd managed to get inside using the spare key she kept hidden in the building's mailroom. The first thing she did was call the police to report the robbery. then cancel her credit cards and phone service. The practical stuff was easy when you had money and connections, but she couldn't stop thinking about Jake. Linda walked to her home office, a room lined with awards and photos from business conferences. Her company, Chentech Industries, was worth over $3 billion. She employed thousands of people and had offices in 12 countries. She was scheduled to speak at a conference next week about leadership and success, but tonight she felt like a fraud. When was the last time she had helped someone without expecting anything in return? When was the last time she had even noticed someone who needed help? She spent her days surrounded by people who agreed with everything she said and told her how brilliant she was. She ate at restaurants where the staff knew her name and gave her the best table. She traveled in cars with drivers and stayed in hotels where someone else carried her bags. She lived in a bubble, and tonight, that bubble had burst. Linda picked up the landline phone and dialed her assistant's home number. "Michael, it's Linda. I know it's late, but I need you to do something for me first thing tomorrow morning." "Of course, Ms. Chen, what do you need?" "I need you to find someone. His name is Jake Wilson. He's a construction worker, probably lives somewhere in Queens. I don't have much more information than that, but I need to know everything about him. Where he works, where he lives, his background, everything." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Michael had worked for Linda for 5 years, and he'd never heard her sound quite like this before. "Is this related to the robbery? Should I call security?" "No," Linda said quickly. "This is personal. And Michael, this stays between us for now." After she hung up, Linda walked back to the window and looked out at the city again. Somewhere out there, Jake was probably falling asleep on a couch in a small apartment, worried about bills and his daughter's future. He had no idea that his simple act of kindness had shaken the foundation of someone else's world. Tomorrow, Linda would begin a search that would change both of their lives forever. Michael had always been good at his job, but this was different. In 5 years of working for Linda, he'd never seen her this focused on finding one person. Usually when she wanted information about someone, it was for business, checking out potential partners or competitors. This felt personal. He started with the basics. Jake Wilson, construction worker, probably lives in Queens. In a city of 8 million people, it should have been like finding a needle in a haystack. But Michael had resources that most people didn't. By 10 o'clock the next morning, he had a list of 17 Jake Wilsons in the New York area. By noon, he'd narrowed it down to 3 who worked in construction, and by 2 o'clock, he'd found the right one. Jake Wilson, age 34. Lived at 425 Oak Street, apartment 3A in Astoria, Queens. Worked for Morrison Construction Company. Widowed 2 years ago. 1 daughter, age 8, but Michael didn't stop there. Linda had said she wanted to know everything, and he took that seriously. What he found made him understand why his boss was so interested in this man. Jake's wife, Catherine, had died of cancer after a 2-year battle. The medical bills had wiped out their savings and left Jake with debt that would take years to pay off. Despite this, Jake had never missed a day of work. His supervisor at Morrison Construction described him as their most reliable employee. The elementary school principal spoke highly of Lily, Jake's daughter. Honor roll student, always polite, never caused any trouble. The principal mentioned that Jake never missed a parent-teacher conference. Even when it meant leaving work early and losing pay, Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly neighbor who watched Lily after school, had nothing but good things to say about Jake. "He shovels my sidewalk every time it snows," she told Michael over the phone. "Never asks for anything in return. And when my grandson needed help with his math homework, Jake spent 2 hours teaching him fractions. That man has a heart of gold." The more Michael learned, the more impressed he became. Jake coached Little League baseball on weekends for free. He'd helped 3 different neighbors move apartments without being asked. Last Christmas, when the Rodriguez family couldn't afford gifts for their grandchildren, Jake somehow found a way to buy small toys for each kid. But the financial picture was heartbreaking. Jake was 3 days behind on rent and facing eviction. His bank account had less than $50. He'd been trying to get his high school diploma through night classes, but had to drop out because he couldn't afford the fees. Michael printed out everything he'd found and walked to Linda's office. She was standing by the window, staring out at the city like she'd been doing a lot lately. "I found him," Michael said, placing the thick folder on her desk. Linda turned around and picked up the folder. For the next 20 minutes, she read every page in silence. Michael watched her face change as she learned about Jake's life. The struggles, the sacrifices, the quiet acts of kindness that nobody except his neighbors seemed to notice. "He's being evicted tomorrow," Linda said finally. "Yes. The landlord filed the papers yesterday. Jake has until 5 o'clock to come up with the rent money." Linda closed the folder and looked out the window again. Somewhere out there, Jake was probably at work, hammering nails or carrying materials, completely unaware that someone was reading about his life. "What else do you need me to do?" Michael asked. "I want you to call the landlord. Pay Jake's rent for the next 6 months. Do it anonymously. Consider it done. Anything else?" Linda was quiet for a long moment. "Set up a meeting with the board of directors for Monday morning. Tell them we're moving forward with the charitable foundation project. And Michael, I want to visit the construction site where Jake works today. Ms. Chen, are you sure that's a good idea? Maybe it would be better to today, Michael. Find out where he's working and get me the address." An hour later, Linda stood across the street from a half-finished office building in Midtown Manhattan. Workers in hard hats moved around the construction site like ants, each focused on their own tasks. She spotted Jake immediately. His tall frame and careful movements were exactly as she remembered from the subway station. She watched him work for almost an hour. He never stopped moving, never took unnecessary breaks. When a younger worker struggled to lift a heavy beam, Jake was there to help without being asked. When the foreman called for volunteers to work late, Jake's hand was the first one up. This was a man who took pride in his work, even when that work barely paid enough to survive. Linda's phone rang. It was Michael. "The rent has been paid," he said. The landlord was confused but happy. He said Jake had been a good tenant for 3 years and he hated to evict him. "Good. What about the foundation meeting?" "Set for Monday at 9 a.m. The board members were surprised by the sudden urgency, but they'll all be there. Linda hung up and took one last look at Jake. He was helping clean up the work site now, making sure tools were properly stored and the area was safe. Even at the end of a long day, he cared about doing things right. That evening, Linda sat in her home office, drafting notes for Monday's board meeting. For months, the board had been pushing her to start a charitable foundation, partly for tax benefits, partly for good publicity. She'd been resistant, viewing it as just another business, obligation. But now she had a different vision. She wanted to create something that would help people like Jake, working families, who were struggling despite doing everything right, parents who worked multiple jobs but still couldn't afford school supplies for their children, people who helped their neighbors and coached Little League and shoveled sidewalks, but who lived one medical emergency away from losing everything. Linda's company made millions of dollars every month. The bonuses she paid to executives could support dozens of families for years. The money she spent on office parties could pay for children's college educations. She thought about Jake's $10 bill still sitting in her purse. Such a small amount of money, but it had meant everything in that moment. What if she could create hundreds of moments like that? What if her foundation could be the difference between a family staying together and losing their home? Her assistant knocked on the office door. "Ms. Chen, there's a call for you. Someone named Catherine Wilson." Linda's heart stopped. Catherine Wilson. That was Jake's wife's name, but Catherine was dead. Michael's report had been very clear about that. "I think you mean someone calling about Catherine Wilson," Linda said. "No, ma'am. She said her name was Catherine Wilson, and she needed to speak with you about her husband, Jake." Linda's hands started shaking. This wasn't possible. There had to be some mistake. "Put the call through," she said. The voice on the other end was weak but clear. "Ms. Chen, my name is Catherine Wilson. I believe you met my husband Jake yesterday at the subway station. I'm sorry, but there must be some confusion. The records show that Catherine Wilson passed away 2 years ago." A soft laugh came through the phone. "The records are wrong. I've been in a long-term care facility, in a coma for almost 2 years. I woke up 3 days ago. The hospital finally tracked down Jake today and he told me about meeting you. I had to call and thank you for helping him." Linda felt like the world had stopped spinning. Jake's wife was alive. After 2 years, she was alive. "I need to see you both," Linda whispered. "Can you arrange that?" Jake stared at his phone like it was speaking a foreign language. The words didn't make sense. "Couldn't make sense. Mr. Wilson, are you still there?" The nurse's voice was gentle but persistent. "I know this is a shock, but your wife is awake. She's been asking for you and Lily. But the doctor said, Jake's voice cracked. He was standing in the middle of his apartment, still wearing his work clothes, still covered in dust from the construction site. She's been gone for 2 years. She wasn't gone, Mr. Wilson. She was in a deep coma. We've been trying to reach you for 3 days, but the contact information we had was outdated. She only remembered your first name and where you used to work. It took some detective work to find you. Jake sank onto his couch, his legs suddenly unable to hold him up. Catherine was alive. His wife, the mother of his daughter, the love of his life, she was alive. Can I see her? Of course. She's at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital, room 412, Mr. Wilson. She's weak and she doesn't remember everything yet. The doctors say that's normal after such a long coma. But she knows who she is and she knows she has a family. After Jake hung up, he just sat there for several minutes staring at the wall. Lily was at Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment, working on her Jupiter project with supplies that had mysteriously appeared that morning. A delivery man had brought a bag full of everything she needed, along with a note that said, "For a future scientist," from a friend. Jake had been suspicious about the anonymous gift, but seeing Lily's joy had pushed his questions aside. Now with this phone call, the world felt like it was spinning out of control in the best possible way. He called Mrs. Rodriguez and asked her to keep Lily for a few more hours. He couldn't bring his daughter to see her mother until he understood what they were dealing with. What if Catherine didn't remember Lily? What if the reunion was too overwhelming? The subway ride to Brooklyn felt like it took forever. Jake kept checking his phone, convinced that someone would call back and tell him it was all a mistake. But when he walked into room 412, there she was. Catherine looked exactly the same but completely different. She was thinner, and there were machines beeping around her bed. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, but her eyes, those warm brown eyes that had made him fall in love at 19, were the same. "Jake," she whispered, and started crying. He was across the room in 3 steps, holding her hand and crying too. For 2 years he'd imagined this moment, dreamed about it, prayed for it. But he'd never really believed it could happen. "I thought I lost you forever," he said. "I'm here. I'm really here." Catherine squeezed his hand with what little strength she had. "Tell me about Lily. Is she okay? Is she happy?" They talked for hours. Jake told her about Lily's good grades, her science projects, her love of reading. He told her about Mrs. Rodriguez and the Little League team and all the ways their community had helped them survive. He didn't mention the money problems or the eviction notice that had mysteriously disappeared. "You did good, Jake," Catherine said. "You kept our family together. I almost lost the apartment. I've been failing at everything. You've been doing it alone. That was never the plan." Catherine tried to sit up straighter. "The nurse told me something interesting. She said a woman called here yesterday asking about me. Said she met you at a subway station and wanted to make sure I was okay." Jake's heart skipped.
"What woman?"
"Linda Chen. The nurse said she sounded very concerned about our family." Before Jake could respond, there was a knock on the hospital room door. A woman in an expensive coat stood in the doorway, holding a bouquet of flowers and looking nervous. It was Linda. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "I just wanted to make sure Catherine was okay and to meet the man who changed my life." Jake stood up, confused. "Changed your life? I don't understand." Linda walked into the room and set the flowers on the bedside table. "3 days ago, you gave me $10 when I had nothing. You helped me get home safely when I was scared and alone. But more than that, you reminded me what real kindness looks like." "It was just $10, Jake said. "It was everything you had," Linda replied, "and you gave it to a complete stranger." She turned to Catherine. "Your husband is an extraordinary man." Catherine smiled weakly. "I've known that for 15 years. Linda reached into her purse and pulled out a familiar $10 bill, now carefully preserved in a small frame. "I've been carrying this around since that night. It's the most valuable thing I own." "I don't understand," Jake said again. "My name is Linda Chen. I'm the CEO of Chen Tech Industries. I was coming back from a business dinner when I was robbed. I had lost everything, my wallet, my phone, my sense of security. And then you appeared." Jake's mouth fell open. He'd heard of Chen Tech Industries. Everyone had. It was one of the biggest companies in the country. "You're that Linda Chen?" he whispered. "I am. And tomorrow morning I'm announcing the launch of the Wilson Family Foundation, named after your family. It's going to help working families who are struggling, parents who are doing everything right but still can't get ahead, children who deserve better opportunities." Jake sat down hard in the hospital chair. "I don't. This is too much. I can't accept this. You're not accepting anything, Linda said with a smile. You're inspiring it. Your kindness that night made me realize that I'd been living in a bubble, surrounded by people who only cared about money and power. You showed me what really matters. Catherine reached for Jake's hand. Let her do this, honey. Let her help other families the way you helped her. There's more, Linda continued. I've spoken with your landlord. Your rent is paid for the next year. I've also arranged for a full scholarship to help you finish your high school diploma. And there's a college fund set up for Lily. This is crazy, Jake said, laughing and crying at the same time. This doesn't happen to people like me. It happens to people who deserve it, Linda said. And it happens because sometimes when we least expect it, strangers become angels. A small voice came from the doorway. Daddy? Lily stood there with Mrs. Rodriguez, who had brought her after Jake called with the incredible news. The little girl looked scared and confused, staring at the woman in the hospital bed. Lily, sweetheart, Catherine said, tears streaming down her face. Come here, baby. It's Mommy. The reunion was everything Jake had dreamed of and more. Lily was shy at first, but soon she was curled up next to Catherine's bed, telling her all about school and her friends and the Jupiter Project. Catherine listened to every word like it was the most important thing she'd ever heard. Linda watched from the corner of the room, tears in her eyes. This was what success really looked like. Not the money or the awards or the business deals. This was what mattered. Families reunited, kindness rewarded, hope restored. Thank you, Jake said to her quietly. For everything. Thank you, Linda replied. For reminding me who I want to be. 6 months later, the Wilson Family Foundation had helped over 300 families. Jake had finished his diploma and was working as a supervisor at Morrison Construction. Catherine was out of the hospital and slowly getting stronger every day. And Lily's Jupiter project had won first place at the science fair, but Jake still carried a $10 bill in his wallet, just in case he met someone who needed help getting home. Because as Catherine had always said, kindness isn't about what you have left over after you take care of yourself. It's about what you're willing to share even when you don't have enough. And sometimes when you're willing to share everything, the universe finds a way to give you back more than you ever dreamed possible.